Everybody been trying to get this recording started to try to explain some of the things that I've been doing and posting up on Facebook over the last few weeks. I know it seems like I've kind of slowed down, but I'm kind of on in a difficult area of production for my project right now, and I'd kind of like to explain some of the reasons why I'm doing it. Many of you probably don't know this, but I've been basically studying anatomy since I was 12. I don't know if too many of you remember what encyclopedias are or know what encyclopedias are, but I used to sit down with one nearly every day or every other day and flip through the human anatomy part of it and just read and absorb, soak it in, and eventually it got to the point where I was drawing pictures out of anatomy books and things like that, and my mother was a good encouragement for that type of she encouraged me to go down that pathway, and I never really did merge anatomy and art together beyond anything but a hobby. And basically I do this stuff as a hobby as well. So the stuff that I'm talking about, if I can get here, is this. You're kind of familiar with all this stuff here, and this is basically a culmination of just a few weeks of work. What I'm trying to actually do is take some really high definition meshes that were actually taken from a CT scan and make them a little bit lighter on the computer to use. The computer that I used to have a hell of a lot more memory, about 12 gigabytes worth, and I only have 8 on this one ever since that last one died and I had to rebuild one. And even with that 12 gigabytes of memory, the skeleton and especially the musculature part of the model was getting really heavy on the computer. Almost took up all of its resources all the time. And so I decided that if I was ever going to use this stuff again, I was going to have to make it a little bit easier on the computer. So how can I do that? Well, eventually I got to the point where I got enough software together and enough knowledge together that I could reduce the weight, if you will, of these models and try to get them into the software without taking up a whole bunch of resources. And it actually turned out to be a pretty good idea. So let me show you how we started, or how I started with most of this stuff. If I look at what I started with, is I downloaded this from the what do they call it, the body database or whatever, and we got a whole bunch of body parts in it. I'm looking for a blend file here. Basically what I should do is probably look for something else. Let's get it to the right format. Okay, so here we go. I ended up downloading a huge library of body parts. So each one of these files here is at least some sort of body part or part of a body part. That's a huge list right there. And I really don't know what this file name is, or this, or this. So what I had to do is I had to open each one of them, and then they allowed me to download a list that had what the body part was according to this number here. And this number here is basically the number that they use everywhere for anatomical identification, as far as like what type of body part it is, where it is in the body, how it relates to the body, how it relates to its surroundings, and all that other stuff. It all has a number. Every single part of your body has one of these numbers, and they're going to be the same probably internationally. So this is from the Life Sciences database. That's what I should say. And it's out of Japan, actually. So this was a CT. I believe it was just a CT scan. Maybe it was a CT MRI of a person. And then they did what's called segmentation to create these parts. So what I did is I optimized them. And I split them up in their different areas. So you can see there's different areas, and not all of them are complete though, so that's why I keep on checking back. But for example, the skeletal system, I then renamed every single part as I optimized them. And so I optimized them to get rid of a whole bunch of triangles that they're made up of. We're going to look at that here in just a second, what I'm talking about. And it's still really heavy. So basically what I'm doing is I'm working on the spinal column right now, and so we're going to go ahead and jump right into that. So in here in the 10th area, what I do is I have the third cervical vertebrae that I've kind of already done stuff with. And we're going to import that and take a look at it, and it's about 5 megabytes. And this is what we're looking at right here. And I know it looks kind of funny shaded wise here, but this is after I have taken in an optimized mesh, what we call it, and then subdivided it again and then froze it at that subdivision level, and we make all these little squares. That's what makes up this object. And what I'm doing is I'm using this type of object, this type of subdivision, to use this high detail stuff, all the ridges and stuff, to make it into something, we call it baking this into an image map that we can place on something that has a lot less squares to make it lighter. Because this, as you can see, is going to get really heavy really quick. In fact, there are over 51,672 faces in this object alone. And if I look at this and realize that there are several more vertebrae like this, at least 7 in the cervical vertebrae, 12 in the thoracic, 5 in the lumbar, sometimes 6, sometimes 4, depends on genetics, we're going to be looking at a really heavy object. So my job was to make this a little bit lighter. So I think what I'm going to show you right now is how I make this high resolution part, and then we export it out for use somewhere else. So if I try to restart this, there we go. It's kind of laggy because of the recording software and everything like that. What I'm going to do is import. We're going to go into the skeletal system. I love these bookmarks that this thing has over here. And then I'm going to look for, I think I call them, let's see here. Where is it at? 4th cervical. Pretty small right now. Going to import that. This is what it looks like at first when I first put it in there, because I optimized it and it's all kind of faceted, so you can see that it doesn't quite look like the other one I just showed you. It's got a lot of these little gross facets in it, or large facets, and I don't want that. I want to use this to bake in its detail, and that's all I really want it for. So I had to re-subdivide this thing, and I use Blender. This is Blender 3D that we're in, that you're looking at right now. It's free and it does a lot of things really well, and if it did just a couple more things really well, I'd probably just use this as my app of choice. But there are some things that it falls far short on, but this is one of the things that it's strong at. And it allows me to export a nice, clean, smooth bit of geometry out of it. So I'm going to give it a subdivision surface modifier, and you can see that it's already dividing that, and we're getting some details back, which is good. And I'm going to tell it to go ahead and shade it smooth, so then it smooths out all those little rough facets, because if I leave those rough facets in there, at the later stage, that thing that I called baking, when we bake it, those rough facets bake into the map, and so then it's going to look rough on our low polygon mesh. This is now a high polygon mesh. Right now it doesn't look like it. You can still see that these facets are in here. Let me get to a different shade, but you can see there's some subdivisions, these lighter colors. It looks like there's a lot more stuff there than there was before. If I do what's called freezing the mesh in other apps, or applying this modifier, what it does is it makes sure that all that stuff is frozen in there. What does that mean? That means that all those subdivisions are now in there. And it's all smooth, and so we're ready to go. That's all I need to do at this stage. So we're going to export this as a wavefront object. I'm going to go to temp. I'm going to rename it something a little bit simpler. Probably C4, whoops, and HP for high poly. And that's how I'm getting all these out, is high poly, and then the retopos, which we'll talk about later. That's the retopology mesh. That's the low polygon mesh that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to export that stuff out. It's going to take a little bit to export because it's a larger file now. But we're back. So that's all I need to do for this part. Now we go on to the retopology, and I'll explain more about that in the next app. So let's get this stopped, and then we'll move on over to an app that I've been using for retopology. I've been testing it out. It's called 3D Coat. And I'll explain more about that here in just a little bit.